Hello students, welcome to E-pgp Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to speak on the module Progressive Evolution of Man, Biological Dimensions from the paper Human Origin and Evolution. The learning objective of this module are to describe the process of evolution, to understand the hominization process, to describe the progressive changes that occur in biological dimensions of the man evolution, to know about the factors that had led to bipedalism and erect posture, to understand the importance of the development of brain, speech, language in evolving the human being. Now let's have a look about the introduction of the evolution. Evolution is the gradual process by which the present diversity of the plants and animals arose from the earliest and most primitive organism, which is believed to have been continuing for at least the past 3,000 million years. Until the middle of the 18th century, it was generally believed that each species was divinely created and fixed in its form throughout its existence. It is believed that every species was individually created by God in the form in which it exists today and is not capable of undergoing any change. This is referred as the theory of the special creation. Special creation was contradicted by the fossil evidences and genetic studies, and the pseudo-scientific arguments of the creation science cannot stand up to logical examination. It was generally accepted explanation of the origin of the life until the advent of Darwinism. However, Lamarck is the first biologist to publish a theory to explain how one species could have evolved into another. He suggested that changes in an individual are acquired during its lifetime, chiefly by increased use or disuse of the organ in response to a need that continues to make itself felt, and that these changes are inherited by its offspring. Thus, the long neck and the limb of a giraffe are explained as having evolved by the animal stretching its neck to browse on the foliage of the tree. This is also called as the inheritance of acquired characteristics. But it was not until the publication of the Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859 that special creation was seriously challenged. Unlike Lamarck, Darwin proposed a feasible mechanism for evolution and comparative anatomy. The modern version of the Darwinism, which incorporates the discoveries in the genetics, remains the most acceptable theory of evolution. About 2,000 million years ago, the first cellular form of the life appeared on the earth. Some of these cells had the ability to release the oxygen. Slowly, this single-celled organisms become multicellular life form. About 500 years ago, invertebrates were formed. Jawless fish evolved around 350 million years ago. Seaweeds and few plants existed around 320 million years ago. The first organism that invaded land were the plants. About 350 million years ago, the animals' lobe fins type fishes evolved into first amphibians who lived both on the land as well as in the water. These were the ancestors of the modern days frogs and salamanders. The amphibians evolved into reptiles which lay thick-shelled eggs that do not dry up in the sun. The turtles, tortoises and crocodiles are the descendants of these reptiles. In the next 200 million years, reptiles of the different shape and the sizes dominated the earth. Some land reptiles were the dinosaurs. About 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs suddenly disappeared from the earth. The first mammal were the shrews. Their fossils are small size. Mammals are the viviparous and protected their unborn young inside the mother's body. When the reptiles came down, mammals took over the earth, and that is how evolution occurs. Now let's discuss about the progressive evolution of the man. About 15 million years ago, primates called the Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus were existing on the earth. They were hairy and walked like gorilla and chimpanzee. Ramapithecus was more human-like while Dryopithecus was more ape-like. So they were the forerunners of the hominids. Progress was made further when a skull was discovered about 5 million years ago. It had a brain size of about 500 cubic centimeter within the range of the ape brain, but its jaw and teeth were human-like. It was probably not taller than 4 feet but walked upright. It was named as Australopithecus africanus, which lived in the East Africa grasslands. Evidences shows that they hunted with stone weapons but essentially ate fruits. From the Australopithecus evolved the Homo habilis, that is the first handy man, which was characterized by having a larger brain than the Australopithecus, that is 650 to 800 cubic centimeter, using tools and being bipedal. They probably did not eat meat. Homo erectus appeared about 1.5 million years ago. Its brain capacity increased to about 800 to 1200 cc, and they migrated to Asia and Europe. Fossils of the Java men and the pecking men belonged to the Homo erectus. They probably ate meat. Homo erectus was later replaced by Homo sapiens. These were several subspecies of the Homo sapiens, a widespread one of the which was Homo sapiens neanderthals, that is the Neanderthal men, a large-brained game hunter. The Neanderthal man with a brain size of 1400 cc lived in Near East and Central Asia between 10,000 to 40,000 years back. They used the hides to protect their body and buried their dead bodies. The oldest remain of the Homo sapiens sapiens, that is Cro-Magnon, appeared around 35,000 years ago, probably having evolved from Neanderthal man. They had large brain size, that is 1500 cc, as they are today, and existed as the hunter-gatherers in cooperative bands. They were stout, short, and used hides for clothing. They built their huts for shelter and buried their dead bodies. This figure shows the hominization process. Hominization process is the evolutionary transformation of the hominoids into hominids. It is a process that occurred in the hominid line since its divergence from the common hominid ancestor shared with any living ape. The term is applied to include all those aspects of the structural and behavioral changes that occurred in the hominid line, finally leading to the evolution of modern men. These changes essentially constitute the essential biological and cultural factor that contributed to human evolution. Now let's see the biological dimension of progressive evolution of men. Number one of those is the erect posture and bipedal locomotion. The most obvious things about the human being that differentiate them from all other members of the animal kingdom is their upright posture and their associated habit of walking, known technically as bipedal motion. Many of the distinctively human morphological traits are directly attributable to these two facts of the human life. The shape of the vertebral column in mammals is delicating, adjusted to support the animal center of gravity. In a buffalo, this point is over the forelegs and its backbone resembles the profile of a cantilever bridge with the weight carried on a central pillar. In Anthropoidea, the center of the gravity is shifted back considerably and the vertebral column is unusually flexible for quadruped features that reflect a tree-dwelling ways of life featuring agile grasping and jumping with the strong rear leg thrusting. The stresses put on the backbone by the brachiating resulted in its becoming somewhat stiffened, with several lumbar vertebrae becoming thoracic vertebra. This fact suggests that humans are more closely related to the brachiators than non-brachiating primates. Quadrupedal monkeys have an average of 9 lumbar vertebrae and 10 thoracic vertebrae, given average 6 and 13 respectively. Great apes have 4 and 13 and humans have 5 and 12. The characteristics of the human column that are specific adaptation to an upright posture include enlarging of the lower vertebra to absorb the force of compression, relative consistency in the size of the spine protruding from each vertebra resulting from a lack of weight bearing stress points along the spine, as opposed for instance to the gorilla, in which the spines of the back vertebra are elongated to provide a solid anchor for the heavy neck muscles that must support the forward jutting head, unnecessary in humans. Where the head is nicely balanced on the top of the vertebral column, increase in the size and number of the bones in the sacrum to take up the transmission of the weight through the pelvis and the length, that is human average 5 to 6 sacral bones, great apes around 5 quadrupedal lower primates 2 to 4, and finally a sharp backward curve of the spine in the lumbar region, providing a solid platform to transfer the weight of the body onto the pelvis and giving the human spinal column its distinctive S shape. It is observed that these and other human features emerges as our ancestor becomes increasingly bipedal. True enough, many have mostly teeth and jaw fragments from Ramapithecus. We think that these creatures spend a great deal of their time on the ground, on the fringes of the forest in the Miocene epoch, and if we remember that primate developed their vision rather than their sense of smell, standing on hind legs might well have been crucial for spotting the abundant meat-eating predators for which Ramapithecus, with no specialized defensive weapons, must have been an attractive and even easy meal. Thus, we can speculate that there were strong selective pressures in the form of carnivores on Ramapithecus to develop highly cooperative social groups and efficient communication code depending on the sounds rather than visual signals that would be difficult to see in the tall grass, and the habit of rearing up on the hind legs to scan the countryside lot danger. Certainly, these features became the principal adaptive characteristics of subsequent hominid group. Australopithecus are already clearly bipedal and erect, although certain human features had not yet completely evolved. The pelvis is not yet broadened and rounded as much as in the modern humans for support of the internal organs, as well as the enhancement of the passing of a large brained infant at birth, although it is already much broader and rounder than in the modern great apes. The lumbar curve is not yet fully developed, and the foramen magnum, the hole through which the spinal cord passes out of the skull and into the vertebral column, into the rear of the center of the base of the skull, meaning the head was not yet fully balanced at the top of the vertebral column. On the other hand, their feet were nearly modern. They had arch front to rear and the sideways and a full heel to provide the good walking leverage. As we do, it appears that Australopithecus developed persistent hunting, pursuing game until the game was exhausted as a major survival technique, and put it in premium on the long distance walking. In any event, walking must have been of extreme importance to the Australopithecus, because by the time of the Homo erectus, the skeletal structure, with the exception of the head, was essentially fully modern, completely adapted by walking. Even the skull shows adaptation to erect posture with the shifting forward of the foramen magnum closer to the center of the base of the skull. Thus, by the time Homo erectus trekked out across the continent of the Old World, virtually all of the uniquely human traits associated with the erect posture and bipedal locomotion had evolved. Now let's discuss about the remodeling of the face and the teeth. When an infant primate is born, it possesses out of its mother's womb through the birth canal, through the vagina and into the realities of the social life. The birth canal is surrounded by that form the lower front of the mother's pelvis. This bone sets a limit on the size that a newborn infant can be at the moment of its birth. If any part of it is too large, it will stuck with the result that both the infant and the mother are quite likely to die, which means that they will not contribute their genes to the ongoing evolutionary process. It was noted that a major trend of the human evolutionary development was a dramatic increase in the size of the brain, which we deduce from the fossil evidences showing a rapid increase in the size of the brain case since the Australopithecus. Since the size of the head as a whole should not keep getting larger beyond a limit, allowing by the process of the birth, there was a strong adaptive pressure to shorten the snout and reduce the size of the face to make space for the cranial expansion in the course of human evolution. Fortunately, other processes came into play that made this possible. Firstly, we have to identify what changes took place in the face and the teeth among our hominid ancestor. Already with the arrival of Ramapithecus, we can see some hominid facial trends. The upper and the lower canine interlock only slightly, and there is no diastema next to the canine to make room for such interlocking. Australopithecus continues this trend, although the face and the jaw are still massive by modern standards. Heavy ridges of the bone arc over the eye sockets, probably affording a measure of a protection as well as the shelf against which some of the large jaw muscles could be anchored. Indeed, in robust form, the sagittal crest running from front to the back on the top of the skull provides more space for such adjustment. For all practical purposes, Australopithecus display little in the way of forehead, although the gracile line shows some movement in that direction. Neither Ramapithecus nor the Australopithecus nor even the Homo erectus has any chin whatever. In fact, many still have a ridge of bone running partway back which forces the front teeth to protrude outward. All three groupings have very large teeth in proportion to the whole head by modern standards. The face of Homo erectus is by far its most primitive aspect. It is still massively jawed with a minimal forehead sloping sharply back from heavy bone brow ridges. The skull narrows sharply behind the eye sockets, providing a groove along which the large cheek muscles that operate the jaws can run. Its front teeth still buck outward and its nasal cavity, palate and tongue are long and flat compared to those of the modern humans, while its larynx sits much higher than in its throat than ours, and of course its head hangs slightly forward, somewhat awkwardly balanced on its vertebral column with a foramen magnum that is still somewhat behind the center of the skull's base. But in virtually every other respect, Homo erectus has essentially modern skeletal features. Even Neanderthal, the earliest member of our own species, Homo sapiens, retained a heavy looking face and large teeth by modern standards, especially the classical Neanderthal of southwestern Europe. However, by this time we can observe the emergence of a real forehead, although some specimens still retain the heavy brow ridges of the Homo erectus. The front teeth are rooted vertically and the lower jaw that supports them beyond gives them a solid base, and a fully modern chin has developed. These developments are further elaborated in the transition to fully modern Homo sapiens sapiens. The brow ridges diminishes, the forehead approaches being vertical, the chin is prominent, the face with its small vertical teeth is flat with a nose that protrudes. The foramen magnum is now exactly at the center of the skull's base, the head balancing nicely on the vertebral column, the nasal cavity and palate are shortened and arched, the tongue thickened and shortened, and the larynx sunken down into the throat, which for the first time points the mouth pretty much at a right angle rather than obliquely placed. Many factors brought about these changes. First, the trend towards the upright posture resulted in the foramen magnum being moved towards tilting the head upright into a vertical position and possibly exerting some squeeze against the face. Second, the long flat mouth, longer palate and nasal cavity with a high larynx and the wide angle at which the throat joined the mouth prior to the Homo sapiens drastically limited the number of the sound the vocal apparatus could produce and the speed with which it could produce them. If the evolution of the speech were of crucial importance to the overall process of the human evolution, then there would have been selective pressure for molding the face in the form it finally assumed. In fact, there is evidence that the mouth and the tongue of the Neanderthals are still too flat to produce the modern range of the sounds and also probably lack enough quickness of the tongue to produce the sounds at a modern rate. Finally, it appears that human teeth only really were free to become the small when people gave up using the mouth as a tool, a fifth hand used for holding, tearing and even chewing the items to soften them. This happened in the last 10,000 years with the development of the food production, when the agricultural revolution replaced the hunting and gathering and foraging as the principal means of the subsistence for most of the people in the world. Now let's have a look at the expansion and development of the brain. There is a dramatic increase in the brain case as we approach the specimen of the Homo sapiens. This is indeed worth noting, and physical anthropologists have spent a great deal of the time studying the rapid increase in the brain size in the course of the past Australopithecus evolution. The reasons are complicated. First, in general, the overall size of our ancestors increased at each evolutionary stage. We concluded that there was strong selective pressure for the increase in the size, probably because of the larger body size made it easier to hold and use the tool, and also increased the amount of the muscles available to hunter and the forager on long tracks. But the brain grew longer, proportionately did the body. The most likely reason is that an increase in the brain size tremendously increases the possibility, indeed the probability of an increase in the both the number and the kind of the connections between the brain cells. It is an increase in the kind of connections between the brain cells that is apparently responsible for the emergence of the new kind of the mental operations such as thinking and using the language operations that are fundamental to the human existence. Scientists have been able to document that the tremendous growth in the brain size by carefully studying the contours of the insides of the fossil brain case between the Australopithecus and Homo erectus was accompanied by an increase in the size and the complexity of the outside surface of the brain called the cerebral cortex. This expansion of the cortex is the most recent evolutionary development of the brain, and it is the cortex that is primarily associated with the thinking and the language use. Each of the senses is represented in a specific area of the cortex, a part of the outer layer of the brain where the fibers carrying the messages from the surface of the body concentrate according to the sense. Thus, for example, the stimulation of the retina in the eyeball results in the message flashing along the optic nerve fibers and flooding into one area of the cortex. Message from the fingers, that is the touch, arrive in another area, taste message in yet a third area, and so on and so forth. The area of the brain that are specialized to process these incoming messages are called the nuclear zones of the cortex, and each sense has its own nuclear zone. Around each nuclear zone, anatomists have found the specialized bundles of the fiber are concentrated into what we called as the association areas, and the clear differentiation of the separated association areas increase as we move up the orders of the primate towards the human being. Now the job that each association area performs is very complicated, but it amounts to modifying the operation of a nuclear zone. For example, damage to the visual association area in the human brain results in the person's losing his or her ability to identify the objects even though the objects are still seen. The messages are still represented in the visual nuclear zone. It appears then that the association area of the brain are central to the process of recognition. They are where information about the outside world is stored, where incoming stimuli can be matched against the stored experience and decisions can be made. Upon seeing a tiger, one can decide to issue a warning to the one's neighbor and take to one's heels, or alternatively face the predator and try to comfort into a mouth of meal. In humans, large bundle of the nerve fibers connect the association areas of the cortex. This provides us with the ability to pass the message back and forth, directing between these association areas to compare and control their different recognition, in other words, to think. The cortex also houses the nuclear zones for triggering the muscle actions, that is motor functioning. An outstanding characteristics of the Anthropoidia that they have evolved direct link ups between the association areas of the sight and the touch and the association areas around the major motor function centers. These direct link up results in the ability to fit one's bodily movement to what one sees and holds, while freed from other functions of the brain such as the emotions and might interfere. Thus, if you think about it for a moment, you will see that these structural features of the anthropoid brain amount to being a necessary preconditions for using the tools. In other words, regardless of why the anthropoids acquired these features without their regular tool use, a prominent speciality of our hominid ancestor as they evolved could not have developed. Now let's understand the process of culture and hominization. Each stage of hominid origin evolution seems to have been accompanied by the major advances in cultural evolution. Because stone tools are relatively indestructible, much of the early cultural evolution is represented by the evolution of the tool industries. The importance of the tool as the molders of the hominid evolution has been recognized for a long time. Upright postures, leaving the hands free to manipulate the objects and carry things for long distances, certainly is dynamically connected with the adaptation of the tool use by the early hominids. In order for a foot to be useful, one must have it with them when the moment arises to put to work. This makes the tool in advance planning, walking on two legs to free one's hand to carry out the tool, and commitment to use the tool. To see how much of the commitment this represents, by carrying a brick around with you for a while or for a whole day. Those parts of the human brain most needed to manipulating the tool are well evolved. Aside from the one mentioned, other highly developed areas include the frontal lobes that organize the behavior into sequences and the motor association areas that control the finger and the thumb. The hand itself is marvelously evolved. It combines the powerful curled fingers grip with which the heavy objects can be moved with the delicate manipulation possible when the small objects are held between the finger and the thumb, and the ability to fully oppose the thumb to all the fingers is uniquely human. Thus, much of what we take for granted about the man today is the result of natural selection operating on his ancestors, adapting them to the environment he himself has created or began to create. Tools, but culture is more than just tool. One of the most important features of the culture is the language, which also profoundly influenced and was influenced by the human evolution. Now let's see the language and its evolution. There are three areas of the brain that are highly evolved in the humans and appears to be crucial for the human linguistic ability. One is called the Broca area and is located towards the front of the dominant side of the brain. This area activates, among things, the muscles of the jaw, lips, tongue and larynx. The second is the Wernicke area by a large bundle of the nerve fiber called the arcuate fasciculus, and third is the brain site where the verbal comprehension takes place. The third area is the angular gyrus, situated next to the Wernicke area, serving as a link in between the parts of the brain that receive the stimuli from the senses, organs of the touch, hearing and the sight. Man could not possibly speak without these brain areas. It is interesting to note that all these three are located in the cortex. The new brain, which has already been emphasized, is most evolved in humans and appears to have first approached its modern size and complexity in Homo erectus. The fact that all the three are located in the cortex allows the sensory inputs and the verbal representations to be connected with each other without having to go through the old brain, especially the limbar system, which activates such basic responses as aggression, fear, hunger and sexual arousal. Consequently, human beings can think, talk and experience the world without involving these gut level states. Other animals, including our primate ancestors, have not developed these brain areas nearly as much as the modern men. Thus, many important aspects of the man brain seems to have evolved as speech specialization, and it can be reasonably supported that the verbal communication was so adapted for the men's ancestors that strong effective pressures progressively molded these changes. Certainly, language is a principal mode for human existence. These are the major progressive changes in biological dimensions that characterizes the human evolution, which are erect bipedalism, reduction of the face and expansion and development of the brain. All these changes interacted with each other and all are dynamically connected to the evolution of the social groups and culture, the primary mechanism of adaptation. Now let's summarize what we have learned so far in this module. Evolution is the gradual process by which the present diversity of the plants and animals arose from the earliest and most primitive organism, which is believed to have been continuing for almost past 3000 million years. About 15 million years ago, primates called the Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus were existing on the earth. They were hairy and walked like the gorillas and chimpanzee. Progress was made further when a skull was discovered about 5 million years ago, and it was named as the Australopithecus africanus. From the Australopithecus evolved the Homo habilis, the handyman, then Homo erectus appeared about 1.5 million years ago. Homo erectus was late replaced by the Homo sapiens. There were several subspecies of it. Homo sapiens are widespread, one of which was Homo sapiens neanderthals. That is the Neanderthal man, a large-brained game hunter. The oldest remain of the Homo sapiens, that is Cro-Magnon, approaches around 35,000 years ago, probably having evolved from the Neanderthal men. They had the large brain size, that is about 1500 cc. Each stage of hominid organic evolutions seems to have been accompanied by the major advances in the Cultural Revolution. Because stone tools are relatively indestructible, much of the early cultural evolution is represented by the evolution of the tool industries. There are three areas of the brain that are highly evolved in the humans and appears to be crucial for the human linguistic ability. One is called as the Broca area, second is the Wernicke area, and the third is the brain site where the verbal comprehensions takes place. Erect posture and bipedal locomotion, remodeling of the face and teeth, expansion and development of the brain, cultural and the hominization process, and language and evolution are the major progressive changes in the biological dimensions that characterizes human evolution. Erect bipedalism, reduction of the face, and expansion and development of the brain, all these changes interacted with each other and all are dynamically connected to the evolution of the social groups and the culture, the primary mechanism of the adaptation. Thank you.